Coming up, the New York Football Giants have a giant letdown ahead of the bye week, falling to the Seattle Seahawks out west. They do, however, get to lick their wounds now, as we'll take a look at what went wrong in this game, Richie James, and also if Joe Schoen should be impacted in his trade deadline decision making off of this loss. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets and the disaster that is their season over on the Locked On Nets podcast. My boy, Doug Norrie. And yonder there is the season generational ticket holder, the healthy, wealthy, and wise, if not slightly depressed off the loss, Mr. Andrew Makowitz.
Doesn't it feel a little worse, Adam, because they're going into the bye week? Like, we know the bye week is necessary and it's going to help us get healthy, but now you just got to kind of sit over that stinker of a game for 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, you got to be frustrated by it. Listen, I take no pride, although I do take a little bit of pride in now having 4 consecutive weeks just calling these things right here. I didn't necessarily see it going entirely as the game script went, but the Giants do end up losing in what felt like we talk about sometimes on the NBA side especially. Never felt like the Nets were going to win that game or that they were ever going to really in danger of losing it, even when they were trailing by 5 or 7 points in the fourth quarter, whatever. This game never felt like the Giants were going to win it. I don't know if you had that sense, but I pretty much, maybe like midway through the first quarter, the first quarter, I thought it's all up for grabs still. But everything beyond that just felt like this slow bleed towards us going, okay, so this is how we get to the bye week.
What I was thinking, I was thinking that this is playing out script wise, very similar to a lot of other games where we're trailing again in the fourth quarter. 6.5 minutes to go. The Giants are down 7. The defense gets a great stop. They punt the ball away. So you're going to give the Giants offense the ball with 6.5 minutes down 1 score. And all I'm thinking in my head, Adam, honestly, is Dave's going to go for 2 when they score? Like, is he going to say, let's roll the dice here and try to get one more win and get out of Seattle? Because to your point, I think the longer that game went on, the less chance the Giants had of winning the game. So very similar to Tennessee. It's like, hey, if we score here, let's just go for 2 and try to end this thing here. Instead, soul-crushing fumble number 2 for Richie James. And at that point, I was very close to turning off the TV. It's a done deal at that. The second he fumbles that.
Yeah, and so let's clear Richie James here off the docket. There's a couple different things at a high level from this game that I think didn't work for the New York Football Giants. But obviously, you fumble twice and get choked up about it when you talk about it the following day. But when you fumble twice like that, like obviously it has a massive impact, especially to your point when the defense is getting a stop. That's the reward, right? Now you want to go out there and show, hey, thank you for getting us the ball back. Now we're going to go give the ball back to the Seattle Seahawks, right? So multiple fumbles in really bad spots for Richie James. It's inexcusable from a football standpoint. I'm not going to drag James through the mud over it. I think he should be in the performance doghouse. I don't think he should be like in the franchise doghouse of, he's had a good year. He's been a contributor for this team. It's a bad spot. And I think the first one where he's wearing long sleeves, he takes those off for the second one. And that's usually, like, you hear this all the time. Like when players make mid-game adjustments to their equipment, it's usually because like they're psychologically they're a little bit tilted here, right? When a quarterback all of a sudden either has a glove or takes off his glove that he uses for grip, you go, this is not a good sign. This guy is looking for an answer to a problem that he's having in game.
Yeah, I mean the tough part for Richie James, I understand people talking about him being cut from the Giants. Like I understand the frustration that you have against him, and one of the reasons why, Adam, is because we forget that he has lost his role in the wide receiver room. He didn't play at all at wide receiver. Didn't get a single target. Didn't get a single look at all. And so what they're saying is your only function right now on this team is to catch punts, bring them in, and try to gain plus yardage. And he was directly related to the Giants giving up 10 points. And they were at such terrible times. Like the Giants are tied. They could end up going into the half with the lead. He muffs a punt. the Seahawks go down, kick a field goal. The Giants are losing at halftime. And then the second one is the Giants are down 7. Defense gets the great stop. Going to have that comeback like we've seen in every single week so far this season. Soul crushing fumble at the end. They get the touchdown to ice the game away. Because he does not have the role anymore in the wide receiver room, I can understand they say, look, mistakes will happen. We cannot have them happen multiple times. There's a lack of focus here on what we need to be doing. And so if they want to go out and get someone else, I totally understand it at this point. We'll probably get into some of the changes or, stand pat situation the Giants will have as we approach the trade deadline. But yeah, I mean, outside of Richie James, tell me, you said, you didn't think the Giants really had a chance. Where do you think were the biggest areas that the Giants struggled?
Yeah, I mean, listen, one of the big things is too, it's like not forget about the fumbles from Richie James, but remember the Giants, which, and I know it's like you if you're a Giants fan, you go Richie James fumbled 2 punt returns, but if you look at it, then you go Giants forced a fumble on Tyler Lockett, right? So you're always going to look at it through the prism of the Giants, which I totally get. But remember, it's the forced fumble on Tyler Lockett that gives the Giants the football inside the 5 that leads to the Saquon Barkley touchdown. Without that touchdown, the offense put up 6 points in this game, and they lost a couple of opportunities because of those fumbles. But the offense was not getting itself into rhythm. And one of the big things was, as mentioned, Barkley and that touchdown, 20 carries for Saquon Barkley, 53 yards. Daniel Jones used his legs 6 times for 20. I think that's fine in the spectrum of a game, right? We want him to use his legs when it works. But the bottom line is we've talked about week after week, going all the way back to that Chicago game where we kept saying, boy, these defenses just like to be duped. Like they don't mind not doing the thing that you think would make it hard for the Giants. Seattle did that defensively. They sold out. They stacked the box several times against Saquon Barkley. And again, don't take this any other way than what it was for this game. Saquon Barkley looked normal. He didn't look all next world elite. And that's number one, most important elite component of the Giants being successful week to week is Saquon needs to be able to give you 2 or 3 razzle-dazzle, explosive, electric, big chunk plays. He couldn't do that in this one. So then all of a sudden the pressure comes onto Daniel Jones. And we saw this was an average game from Daniel Jones at best, slightly below average, throws for 176, 17 of 31, a 24.2 QBR. So when we talk about situational football, even beyond weapons or not weapons and what he has to play with, it was all really there. And I moved right past, we know what's going on with the offensive line and we'll talk about it, but it was just a very blasé overall offensive day for the Giants. And as I think you're going to talk about here, it was also a blasé performance from Mike Kafka as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, we praise the coaching staff for all that they've done. So when things like this happen, we have to look at it with a critical eye. Mm-hmm. Mike Kafka did not call a good game. I mean, look, you mentioned the offensive line. They were primarily the reason why Daniel Jones gets sacked 5 times. Saquon Barkley averages under 3 yards a carry on 20 carries. Like, both the passing and the run game were not working at all. Goes on to the offensive line. Mike Kafka to start the game against the worst run defense in the league threw 6 consecutive passes to start the game. And it's like,
okay, so I'll push back on that in just the one sense of, because now this is like predetermined outcome. Because then on the back end, when you see what Barkley's stat line looks like and what Seattle was doing, it's almost like I think the intent was, let's get beyond what the first phase for Seattle's defense is going to be, trying to stop our running game. Then when it doesn't work, it does make it look worse, right?
It does. And so that was the roll of the dice that Kafka ended up playing. He said, let's get into rhythm through the passing game with short and intermediate passes. Let's get the ball out of Jones's hand. Let's try to get the line in rhythm. And it didn't work. And the game started with 6 consecutive punts, right? And like the third time the Giants got the ball back after the 3 and out of 6 straight passes, everyone in the building knew that Daniel Jones was going to turn around and hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley. Right. He got like a 2-yard loss to start. Now all of a sudden you're behind game script. You're behind like your 50-50 run to pass percentage. And it all kind of went downhill from there. And it felt like that the Giants were trying to get too cute when, we don't have Evan Neal. We don't have Ben Bredesen. We have to establish something. They tried to establish Saquon Barkley. It wasn't working. I honestly, with all these injuries at him, also don't know. Like, the Giants could have played that game for 2 more quarters, and I don't know if they were going to score a touchdown because the offense had no fluidity. Daniel Jones was not in rhythm. Saquon Barkley had no holes, and Richie James probably would have muffed 2 more punts. So, like, I honestly don't really even feel that great about just the offense overall.
Yeah, I just think that, and again, all the injuries are a huge factor here. Like it's why I thought the Giants would lose this game. Like, look, when you look across the way, Geno Smith throws 23 of 34, 212, two touchdowns, no interceptions, right? Like, he has been having a very strong season for the Seattle. They get not electric, by the way, 18 of 51 for Walker. The defense did hold him in check. He's been really good. But then you saw how they were able to move the ball around, right? Especially through the air. 5 for 63 for Lockett, 6 for 55 for Metcalf, both with touchdowns, 4 for 33 for Godwin. So the top three guys there, really a good one, really doing their job. And don't forget, there's that big drop to Lockett when it could have been an earlier touchdown for them. Like, this is what I thought was going to be a problem in this matchup. The Seattle Seahawks have a nice collection of weapons. They have a quarterback who is playing some of the best football in the NFL this season, and they're capable of scoring points. And I think, again, I agree with you that I don't know if this is the best version of the game script, but I also think that the Giants offensively, as a coaching staff, knew if we're not scoring points, and this is what's ironic about it, right? If we're not scoring points, we're going to fall behind, and it's going to be difficult to recover in a game like this against this team. Then you go out and you see the teams exchanging punts for the first quarter and a half, and you go, well, maybe there was a chance here that we could have something different, right? So I wonder in some ways if the Giants just kind of maybe tricked themselves into getting away from what has been their model, try to drag this thing out, grind it down, couple of explosive plays and get there. I think it is indicative, though, of the Giants are 6-2. They're at the midpoint of their season, and they know that there is this other thing offensively that's going to have to happen here for them to have continued success. And this was as good a time as any to try to see if you can start to get that going. It's a bad first sample size.
Yeah, you mentioned Geno Smith. We got to give him praise because he did play well. He was the better quarterback on the field yesterday. There's no question about that.
Yep.
He has looked like this, and he's been surprising everyone this season. I thought it was noteworthy that in the post game press conference they were asking him, was this a revenge game for playing for the Giants for one game? And he's like, no, it wasn't a revenge game. But then he went on to say, shout out to Jerry Reese and Ben McAdoo for being the only two people to believe in me. And I did not have that on my bingo card, in the post-game press conference. You hear Ben McAdoo getting praise from a quarterback. I just thought that was ironic that he's like, it's not a revenge game, but I specifically remember the coach and the GM who gave me that one start when no one else wanted me to.
Well, and by the way, because then it took how many years for him to finally get to be able to be a starting quarterback again, right? So, like, it's like his stops, which included the Chargers at one point after that, where he never touched the football, right? Then went up to Seattle and sat there for a couple of years. I get, like, if you're Geno Smith, man, like, I get it. Like, by the way, this is what every athlete in every single sport does. They figure out something that creates bulletin board material in their own mind that may not be relevant to anything. And that's what drives them to stay focused and play at a high level. And that's what Geno's doing right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the one other thing before we switch over to kind of forward looking, Adam,
Yeah.
is I just want to put this on record, and you're probably gonna not feel the same way that I do, but I certainly just want to say it.
Okay.
I watched the Green Bay Packers game last night, and Aaron Rodgers just looked so disinterested. I watched the Tampa Bay Bucks game, and Tom Brady is yelling at people, and he looks kind of like a shell of himself. And a lot of people are making excuses saying, well, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have any wide receivers, or their offensive line isn't really playing that well. And it's like, we give those guys that all like, oh, when they're playing bad football, it's everyone else's problem and it's everyone else's fault. And it clearly isn't them. And it's like, can we just keep in mind that Daniel Bellinger was out, Evan Neal was out, Ben Bredesen was out. We're down our top three wide receivers. Marcus Johnson led the team in targets and only caught one ball, and it was a bad situational football play on his part. Like, I think it's okay to put a little bit of context around why the offense is struggling, why Saquon was struggling. It's not necessarily that they didn't play to the best of their abilities. It's like, what do you kind of expect if we're going to give all these other people like share the blame across everywhere? I think that's why it's good for us to say Kafka kind of got away from him, offensive line, wide receivers, Daniel Jones, and Saquon Barkley, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it can be in everybody, right? Like, everyone falls underneath the microscope. I listen, I understand why people say why excuses get made for Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. They're Aaron Rodgers and they're Tom Brady. The track record is what builds an excuse. I don't think that it makes sense. I think you watch a game and you say, was it a good game or a bad game? The funny thing, I'll say, I'll use Aaron Rodgers as an example. You go and look at his stats, like, he's still having a good statistical season, right? It's the eye test in the game and whether or not you think he's actually interested in playing football right now that makes the big difference. But yeah, I think everybody, any quarterback deserves that acknowledgement. The difference is like, look at Trevor Lawrence down in Jacksonville, right? Well, Trevor Lawrence has allegedly this high profile of what he's going to be at the NFL. But so far to this point, he's shown himself to be someone who's mistake prone and will make the bad throw, right? And that costs that team on a week-to-week basis. So that's what you hang your hat on when the game isn't going well for them. In this season, I think maybe more quote unquote excuses should be provided for Daniel Jones because he has shown that he's been pretty consistent. He's played pretty well. He's shown the growth, and we know all the things that he's dealing with. So I don't totally disagree with you. And I get why people are going to give every quarterback like that. By the way, who they're not giving it to is Russell Wilson. That guy can't get an excuse if he paid for it. Which is weird. Like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, every excuse in the world. Russell Wilson, and it has looked all time way worse than those other two. Bad for him, but it's like, oh, this guy, what a disaster. And in contrast with what Geno Smith has been doing for Seattle.
It's wild. Yeah, the Russell Wilson thing is interesting. I think it's because he moved teams and people are like, oh, it's a different scheme. And then like two games in, they're like, no, he just stinks. Whereas like Green Bay and Tom Brady have been in the same situation for multiple years. You're like, what's changed? They haven't just fallen off a cliff. But yes.
To a quick shout out to everyone who came in on the live. Obviously, shout out to Jose, shout out to Clash. I appreciate your Brooklyn Nets sentiment. I'm not terribly far off from that page. We have a lot to work through there emotionally in order to get that team back on track. And now to the point that Jose is bringing up as well, the Giants go get a number one wide receiver, right? So here is my thing as the back half of this episode is really going to be about the trade deadline coming up on Tuesday. It's the bye week for the Giants. Really good opportunity for a lot of guys to get healthy. Nick Gates played in this game, my friends. Nick Gates was back out there on the field. His entire family made the trip out to Seattle. He got to see them before the game. Let's just take a brief second on that. The dude had the absolutely gruesome leg injury, everything that he had to go through. I think it's 7 or 8 surgeries on his leg. At one point, they had to go back in to replace something because it was going to get infected. It's just an absolute disaster. And he came back and got physically onto the field. You can't say anything but absolute praise for a guy like that, and someone that has been talked about as being still a leader and someone that everyone respects in the locker room, in spite of the fact that he has not been able to see the football field in so long.
Yeah, it was great to see him back out there. Was like in the jumbo packages and things like that. They're slowly getting him acclimated. From a football perspective, obviously the story is great. From a football perspective, the Giants do need reinforcements on the offensive line. Like they really do. With Ben Bredeson out multiple, week to week at this point, and Evan Neal hurt, we need all the reinforcements we can get because we saw what that offensive line looked like yesterday. 5 sacks of Daniel Jones. They really couldn't run block and they couldn't pass block. That's not a good situation for the offensive line. So that kind of brings me to the next idea of that trade deadline coming tomorrow, Adam. Do you feel like this game changes your thought process going into the deadline? Is there an area that you would address more than another one, or does this make you feel more bullish on the Giants making a move, or do you just say this is a one-off, let's stand pat and keep going where we're going?
Yeah, I don't think that this impacts Joe Schoen's thinking in the slightest, because I don't think that his thinking on this team overall has necessarily been impacted by the 6-1 and then the 6-2 start this season. I don't mean that as in, hey, some players are really being productive. We've brought some guys on, right? Players like Julian Love have stepped up. Xavier McKinney had a really good game yesterday for himself, right? Like there's a lot of bright spots for this team. And also, as I've said throughout the start of this year, again, this is still a part of a rebuilding process. And I don't think that Giants fans should fall underneath the sentiment of we're 6-2, we can be a 10-win team this year, and away we go. We're going to be a consistent playoff team going forward. You may have a down year coming up here in this process. And if you're Joe Schoen, you got the 3 and the 6 back for Kadarius Toney, sending him away to Kansas City. You could use that capital. I'm not saying they won't make a move for a wide receiver here. I think that's the clear number one, asset to go acquire if you're the Giants. And I think that they could have made this move at any point over the past 3 weeks as well, right? Like the Giants have had a strong winning record the entire year. So there's never a time when going and doing something wasn't going to be a viable option. Joe Schoen has consistently gone to guys that they had familiarity with underneath the coaching staff, guys that were on the practice squad. They tried to elevate players and fill in those gaps. And just quickly on the offensive line, we know Shane Lemieux is on his way back. Nick Gates is now back here. Evan Neal should be back. It doesn't look like it's going to be Evan Neal is going to be a little bit longer timeline. I'm trying to remember the way they phrased it after that last game.
Week to week is what they were saying. Yeah.
Maybe he's back after the bye week. Maybe takes another one. But ultimately, you have reinforcements there. I think the offensive line is the way that it is. I can't see them making a move there specifically. And then defensively, you want to add a cornerback. Moreau did not look great in yesterday's game, right? So we say, hey, look how good he looks in filling in. Yes, but there's a reason why he hasn't been a starter in the NFL, right? So you can make these marginal moves, but Joe Schoen doesn't have a lot to work with here. There's not a lot of capital to work with, and I don't think he's looking to sacrifice multiple draft assets to maybe fill in some holes.
The issue that you brought up also is that there aren't that many teams that really are out of it, that are sitting here saying we need to fire sale. You look at the London game, the Broncos end up getting a win. And so
they're not going away. They're not giving up on their season at 3-5. Sorry.
They traded all their first round picks for Russell Wilson. Are they really going to have a fire sale of Bradley Chubb and Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler? I don't think that they're far enough out from this. They still think they have a shot at the wild card. You look at the New Orleans Saints, just absolutely destroyed the Las Vegas Raiders. And so they're one game out of the first place Atlanta Falcons. The only team that had a bad loss that probably is done is Carolina, who, field goal kicker misses a kick in overtime and Atlanta goes down and kicks a field goal. They're multiple games out. They're three games
by the
out
way, sorry, can I just briefly say, man, DJ Moore, what an all-time brutal, right? Absolutely electric catch. It comes from PJ Walker, the XFL quarterback. Beautiful. And then you rip the helmet off. And that specifically is that costs you. That costs you in a big way. It's just brutal.
It is. And yes, there's a whole host of things. It's the guy makes a big catch. He's not even on the field and he takes off his helmet. I know situationally you're supposed to know those things. To me, I'm like, come on. That seems like a pretty foolish penalty to even call, but I get that they have to.
Yes. I think the penalty is absolutely idiotic, and I don't know why it should matter if a player rips off his helmet and is jacked up about scoring, and you shouldn't be a guy doing it. But just to your point too, around these NFL standings, right? Because the Panthers lose, okay, you want to say that they're clearly out of it, even though they're only two out. They're only 2 games out in the loss column from the Atlanta Falcons in that division right now. But it's safe to say you would think that they're further from being competitive than not. You mentioned the Raiders. I think that you can put them in the old, this isn't going to go well. The problem even for them is because it's a new coach. You brought in Devontae Adams. I don't see them bailing out on their season. That's somewhere where I thought a Hunter Renfrow, maybe would be a targetable player for a team like the Giants potentially. But again, asking price is going to be high. Houston Texans are the other team on this list. We've already seen that Jacksonville is willing to jettison some of their talent. And then you could look at the Pittsburgh Steelers maybe, but they don't really have anything that I think we could acquire from them. And Cleveland's not going to give up because we know they have that quarterback coming back here later in the season. So to your point, there's only a handful in the Detroit Lions, obviously. And I'll go back to that. If you're looking to make the move, I still say Josh Reynolds is the really easy decision to make here. If you're the Giants, if you wanted to go to market, a 7th round pick might get Josh Reynolds from Detroit and just help you in that room. But there's limited options for Big Blue.
Yeah, I agree. Josh Reynolds is not being utilized as a wide receiver number 2. You saw it in a shootout game. I think he had 4 targets, 1 catch or 2 catches for 20 yards. It's how is that guy not getting the ball more? They clearly could just throw someone else in there if the scheme is going to go all to Amon-Ra St. Brown and DeAndre Swift. When you talk about the Texans, everyone's saying the Giants have interest in Brandon Cooks. It's
oh yeah, I know, I saw that. What are you out of your minds?
Have you seen that he has an $18 million cap hit next year? Is that the big splash that Joe Schoen wants to make with his third most cap space? Is basically a 30-year-old Brandon Cooks? To me, that makes no sense for where the Giants are. To your point, everyone needs to understand the Giants are living around the fringe, around the margins right now in terms of making a move. They're not going to go up and give a 1st or 2nd round pick, nor do I think they should. We mentioned some of these secondary guys. I mentioned the guys in Carolina. We look at, Terrace Marshall of Carolina, those types of players. It's not going to be a DJ Moore. It's not going to be a Jerry Jeudy. And I certainly hope it's not Brandon Cooks for $18 million. But what I will say, Adam, is this game really does reinforce that the Giants need wide receiver help. And the only one that they have in the building right now is Kenny Golladay. It seems like they've been very hesitant to bring up Khalil Pimpleton. Like they
Yeah.
just don't
Yeah,
want to
he's a
bring him
rookie, and
up.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so because of that, what it was tough watching Richie James muff 2 points. And it's been brutal for me watching Marcus Johnson because I was hoping that he would just fill in and fill a role. He had 6 targets and 1 catch, and he caught the ball short of the sticks, and it was a bad route on his part. Like I can't watch that anymore. And I'm willing to give up a late round pick to have anyone else taking his snaps, Richie James snaps, David Sills snaps. Like these are guys that should be in case of emergency that are getting more than 50% of the snaps on the team. And we have to just find someone that's a little bit more than that. It doesn't have to be a wide receiver 1. It has to be a wide receiver 3 that can fill in.
Yeah, I'll say too, man. 5 for 66. Like I think that wide receiver need has always been something we obviously understand the Giants have needed all year, right? Since the second that you knew Kadarius Toney wasn't going to be out there, and the second that we knew that Kenny Golladay was a shell of himself. But Darius Slayton 5 for 66. Tanner Hudson fills in there with 3 for 58. What I'll point to, as you said, I know Marcus Johnson got a lot of targets. I'm going to point to again, go back to game script and Mike Kafka here and the way that the team went about this. Robinson 2 catches for 15 yards, 3 targets in this game. Like to me, that's not enough for me. I've got my second round wide receiver. He's healthy and on the field. He's ready to go for us. We've seen that he can be pretty dynamic. We've seen that he can be a nice chain mover. I'm finding creative ways, especially in the second half of a game like this. I'm finding ways to get Wan'Dale Robinson more touches. 3 targets. It's flat out is not enough for a guy like that, who is, by the way, like he's your best wide receiver. You can say that like Darius Slayton, and he's proven that he can be capable at the NFL level. But Wan'Dale Robinson, from a skill set standpoint and from a draft profile standpoint, new regime, this is your guy. He needs to be getting more consistent touches. So I'm going to go back to, is the wide receiver room perfect? Obviously not. Is it even one of the top 18 wide receiver rooms in the league? No, it's not. Also, you got to use your best possible players. And this, I will say, I'll mention on Kenny Golladay, like I think that there's going to be some level of optimism from the Giants that he can get back out there after the bye week. And I think that he obviously is motivated to be a part of a winning team. And if you're looking at the way that this offense is run, they do need the big guys, right? They've used David Sills consistently. They've used Marcus Johnson. Darius Slayton has his role. So they want to have that other. Everyone's been talking about, go get another twitchy guy, a quick in space because you lost Kadarius Toney. The first thing they need, it looks like, is another consistent, bigger receiver to then help Wan'Dale Robinson play off of that out of the slot.
Yeah, and just thinking about the wide receiver room, you gave yourself a little bit of credit on correctly predicting, as well you should, multiple games in a row here, kind of understanding the Giants script right now. Mm-hmm. I'm starting to get hot in Andy's bet of the week. I pointed out that it was going to be the Darius Slayton show, and he ended up showing up, and they did not utilize Wan'Dale Robinson. It was kind of the way I thought that they were going to utilize him. I think there needs to be big credit, even though there wasn't very many positives on the offensive side of the football. Darius Slayton, who was buried on the depth chart and basically jettisoned by this coaching staff, kept his head in the game, stayed there, and is the contributor. Without Darius Slayton, this team would be in an even worse world of hurt. And so him being out there getting 5 balls and leading this wide receiver room, he needs to get a little bit of credit. Now, the last thing I'll say about making a move is I think the defense is probably okay. One, keep in mind that we're going to get a lot of these guys back after the bye week. So the reinforcements are coming from within the building. Good news on Daniel Bellinger is people are saying it could be anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks that he's out, as opposed to will he come back for the entire season. So I'm expecting to see Bellinger sooner rather than later from this team. Could be only a couple games after the bye week. So, while I do think that the tight end room is important from a run block perspective, as well as, these 2 winnable games that we have coming, it just feels like now I'm starting to shift over to, the wide receiver room probably does need some little boost. It doesn't have to be a big move at him, but it's got to be something.
Yeah, I mean, I'll close out on what Jose is saying here, right? Oh, sorry, that's Kenny Golladay. I'll get to yours in a second. But they could bring in Charlie. They could bring in Moore, Judy, Cook, anyone else. If Jones does not have time and a line to protect him, it will not make much difference. And I think, again, that's always been my thing. When we talk about this team, there's a lot of areas that they're trying to improve. They're trying to work young players, rookies, developing. That's still a part of this season. As much as we want to just love the record and be excited that they should be going to the playoffs this year, it's still a part of that. And I think that's why it's tricky, because if you say, yeah, they need to bring someone in the wide receiver, then you say, and also on the offensive line, give me one guy. Also in the linebacking room, I'd like to get one guy in there. We could really use a second cornerback too, if we're being totally honest. And frankly, and then all of a sudden you're saying like, why don't you just spend the assets? Now, to your point, this also comes back to Daniel Jones' evaluation process, right? If you want to continue to be able to evaluate him, getting him a weapon helps that process. But if the coaching staff, if ownership, if the GM, if they have a strong sense of where they are on Daniel Jones anyway, that is, again, the reservation of spending draft capital to go get a rental, whatever it may look like. If they want to spend, I think, fifth round is as high as I think Joe Schoen's going to be willing to spend here, and that might be pushing the envelope even a little bit. But if you can go get a guy that just comes into the room and pushes Marcus Johnson or David Sills out of the rotation, so be it. I'm more than happy to do that. It's going to be interesting, man. I think that Hamler would have been one of the targets from the Broncos, and with that win, it takes them out of that conversation. So it's like you really are going to be pressed here. And by the way, one last thing I will say: the Giants. It's always talking about. We said about teams that are being competitive or not. Other teams, like, just because they're having a bad year, they don't go, all right, who should we get rid of? This is bust. They don't automatically turn around and start ripping it down for parts. A team like Detroit has just been now consistently bad. But if you're the Denver Broncos, you go, we just gave up all this stuff for him. We're not going to strip the parts around Russell Wilson and go into next year saying, if you thought it was bad when we had good receivers, wait until you see next year. So we'll wait to see what happens. We'll come in tomorrow. We'll see if there's any rumblings about it. And obviously, as we work towards this bye week here, we're going to have a lot of kind of first half perspectives. What are the things that we've liked? Who surprised us? And we'll touch back into Darius Slayton, because he's slowly building himself towards having probably a pretty solid season for the Giants.
At the end of the day, Adam, this bye week is coming at a really good time. All Giant fans should be just standing ovation for what this team has been able to accomplish over the first 8 games. It leaves a sour taste in your mouth, but the Giants are 6-2 and still have a stranglehold on a playoff spot now. And all the positives that we could talk about from the beginning, just remember, Evan Neal, Ben Bredesen, Azeez Ojulari are all going to be coming back, and those are all key contributors to this team that if they were out there, Daniel Bellinger's another one that'll be just a couple weeks behind them. These are all key contributors that have made this 6-2 start possible. Yeah. So get excited. Be happy for what you've seen. Know that this was kind of a tough game for the Giants to win anyway on the road right before the bye week with all these injuries, and look positively towards the next 2 games, which are the critical games to get to 8-2 and really solidify yourself as a playoff contender.
100%, man. We talked about the game and the state of things right now, but overall, we're all talking about being 6-2 going to the bye week, right? Very winnable games coming out of the bye week. So everything is in front of the Giants right now, and it's just about, ultimately, I think, getting healthy. As Andy pointed out, there's a lot of guys here that can be very big contributors if they're healthy.
And the last thing I'll say, just take this one little nugget as well. You don't know if the Giants are a good team. They've lost 2 games. And the teams that they've lost to are combined 11-5. So they're losing to teams that are actively right now in the playoff hunt. So they're not dumping games that we have in the past where we're playing below the level of competition. Just know that this is where the Giants want to be. This is the way that we want to progress. The next 2 weeks, once we get healthy between the Texans and the Lions, are going to be huge for the development of this team.
The next one will be adding up the total of the wins and losses for teams that we've beaten this year. That can always be a little bit of a prism. We'll be back again tomorrow talking about the trade deadline and all things New York Football Giants. We always thank everybody for being in on the live session, including Marty. I see you out there, buddy. We'll catch you tomorrow. Get your cup of coffee ready. We will, of course, be in here on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. Like, subscribe, download, rate, review. It means absolutely so much to us, and it's totally free to do. Until next time, though, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.